They tell you grief is a wave, but for me, it was a stillness, a cold, hard silence where a life used to be. But what happens when you realize the person weeping beside you isn't mourning a loss, but celebrating a victory? My name is Olivia, and this is the story of how I buried my son and then unearthed a monstrous truth that was buried with him. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever been told you're too old to understand, this story is for you. Follow, like, and hit that notification bell, because the quietest people often have the loudest secrets. My name is Olivia. I am 75 years old, and today I buried my only son, Mark. The service was held at the St. Mary Star of the Sea Church here in Astoria, Oregon, a handsome old brick building that has watched over this town's births and deaths for more than a century. The rain, a constant silver-threaded companion on this coast, felt appropriate. It fell not with violence, but with a weary persistence, blurring the gray sky into the gray waters of the Columbia River, until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I sat in the front pew, feeling less like a person and more like a statue carved from grief, cold and immovable. Beside me, my daughter-in-law, Amelia, was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She clutched my hand, her grip just a little too tight, her fingernails digging faintly into my skin. Her sobs were perfectly timed, rising and falling with the minister's eulogy, each one a delicate, heart-wrenching punctuation mark for the assembled mourners to witness. Her face, framed by a chic black veil, was a mask of tragic beauty. She looked like a painting of a grieving widow, a work of art, not a woman who had just lost her husband. I found myself studying the way a single, perfect tear traced a path through her expensive foundation. It seemed rehearsed. Mark, they said, had died in a tragic boating accident, a freak occurrence. A rogue wave near the Columbia River Bar, that treacherous place where the river's immense power collides with the fury of the Pacific. A place that sailors have respected and feared for generations. They called it the graveyard of the Pacific for a reason. Mark was a skilled developer, they said from the pulpit, a pillar of the community, a man with a vision for Astoria's future. He was a success. That's what they saw. But to me, sitting there on that hard wooden bench, all I could see was the boy who used to run along these very shores, his pockets bulging with sand dollars and smooth gray stones, his laughter carried on the salty wind. The boy who at 10 years old swore he'd build me a castle on the beach that the tide could never wash away. Now, our house feels impossibly large. It's a Victorian monstrosity overlooking the water, a place my husband, Robert, and I bought 50 years ago. I once loved its grand, sprawling rooms, its ornate woodwork, the way the setting sun would set the west-facing windows on fire. I loved the sound of the foghorn at night, a lonely, comforting moan from the river. Now its drafty halls and creaking floors only echo with silence. The silence is a physical presence. It has weight. It presses in on me, suffocating the memories, leaving only a hollow ache where a life used to be. After the service, people came back to the house. They filled the rooms with their hushed condolences and the smell of rain-damp wool coats. They balanced paper plates of KFC chicken on their knees, the smell of fried food and manufactured sympathy feeling like a profound intrusion. They spoke in low, pitying tones, their eyes sliding away from mine as if my grief were a contagion. "He's in a better place," a well-meaning neighbor said, patting my arm. I wanted to ask her what place could possibly be better than here, with his son, with me. But I just nodded. I have become very good at nodding. I retreated to the kitchen, pretending to look for a tray for the potluck dishes still arriving. In truth, I just needed a moment away from the sea of pitying eyes, a moment to breathe air that wasn't thick with the performance of mourning. I stood by the sink, gripping the cold porcelain, and stared out the window at the water that had taken him. The river was a churning, slate-gray beast, indifferent and eternal. It was from the kitchen pantry, its heavy oak door left slightly ajar, that I heard it. I had stepped inside to find a vase, my back to the door, fumbling on a high shelf behind stacks of old china. Amelia was in the living room, just on the other side of the wall. Her audience had changed. The sympathetic townspeople had been replaced by her own friends. Women with sharp heels and sharper smiles. Women who always looked at me and my home as if I were a piece of antique furniture. They were deciding whether to keep or send to auction. Her voice, when it came, was completely different. It was stripped of its breathy, tearful sorrow. What was left was a low, triumphant hiss, cold and clear as ice. "The insurance payout is substantial," she said. I heard the delicate clink of wine glasses, a sound of celebration. My hand froze in midair. More than I even expected. His personal policy was generous. There was a soft murmur of approval from her friends. Then Amelia's voice dropped even lower, laced with a venomous excitement that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. And with Mark finally gone, she paused, and I could practically hear the cruel smile in her voice. "Now I can finally get rid of that godforsaken cannery and this dreary, drafty house. We can sell to Henderson, level the whole waterfront block. Imagine it. A clean slate." A cold dread, colder and more invasive than the Oregon rain, seeped into my bones. It displaced the grief, which had been a heavy, suffocating blanket, and replaced it with something sharp and terrible. The cannery. It wasn't just a building. It was my late husband, Robert's, legacy. A rusted, derelict monument to a different time, a place he had poured his life into. He refused to sell it, even when the money was good, even when the industry had long since moved on. It was a place of memories, of ghosts I liked to keep. After Robert died, Mark had promised me. He'd stood in this very kitchen, his hand on my shoulder, and promised he would always protect it. For his father, for me. Amelia had always hated it. She called it an eyesore, a drain on our finances, a relic holding the town back. Her words had always been cloaked in practicality, in forward-thinking business sense. But the glee in her voice now, it wasn't about money. It wasn't about urban renewal. It was about conquest. It was the sound of a victor describing the spoils of war. In that single sickening moment, the image of Mark's boat, shattered against the unforgiving rocks of the river bar, twisted and rearranged itself in my mind. A rogue wave didn't feel random anymore. It felt orchestrated. It felt convenient. The water hadn't taken my son. Amelia had. In the days that followed, Amelia's grief evaporated like the morning fog off the river. The performance was over. The black veil was put away. She was a woman electrified, a whirlwind of purpose. She was on her phone constantly, her voice a clipped, efficient staccato as she talked to real estate agents and men who used words like zoning and demolition. The house, my home for 50 years, the place where I had raised my son and mourned my husband, was suddenly being invaded by strangers. Men with clipboards and measuring tapes walked through my living room, my bedroom, their clinical eyes assessing every floorboard, every window frame. "For probate, Olivia," Amelia would say, her smile a flash of white, aggressively bright teeth. "Just paperwork. We have to get everything valued for the estate. It's the law." She treated me with a condescending gentleness that felt like being slowly suffocated by a silk pillow. She would bring me tea I hadn't asked for, fluff the cushions on my armchair, and speak to me in that slow, overly enunciated way one speaks to a child or a person they believe to be losing their mind. My grandson, Leo, Mark's 17-year-old son, saw it too. I could feel it. He had always been a quiet boy, more comfortable in the digital world than the real one, but now he was a ghost in his own home. He barely left his room. The only sign of life was the perpetual, faint blue glow that bled from under his door late into the night. He was tall and lanky like his father, with the same thoughtful eyes, but now those eyes were shadowed, haunted. He'd stopped his Twitch streams, his online world, a place where he was confident and followed by thousands, had fallen as silent as our real one. I'd knock on his door, offering a plate of cookies or just a chance to talk. Sometimes he'd open it a crack, his face pale in the light from his monitor, and just shake his head. "I'm okay, Grandma," he'd mutter, but his voice was hollow. He was grieving his father, of course, but he was also watching his mother transform into a stranger, and the confusion was twisting him into knots. He was trapped, and I didn't yet know how to reach him. One evening, about a week after the funeral, Amelia found me in the sitting room. The sun had set, and the room was filled with long, deep shadows. She switched on a lamp, flooding the space with a harsh, unwelcome light. In her hand was a thick manila folder, bulging with documents. She sat on the ottoman in front of my chair, her knees almost touching mine, a posture of forced intimacy. "Just some estate things," she cooed, her voice slick as oil. She fanned the papers out on the coffee table. They were a dense forest of legal jargon, of clauses and subclauses that made my head spin. She pulled one sheet from the stack and handed it to me, along with an expensive-looking fountain pen. "Sign here, Olivia. And here, it's just to give me the authority to handle things. It will make everything so much easier for both of us." I looked down at the document. My eyes struggled to focus on the words, but two of them leaped out at me, stark and brutal. Power of attorney. My hand trembled, not from age, but from a surge of pure, cold adrenaline. I remembered her whispered, triumphant words from the pantry. With Mark finally gone. This wasn't about making things easier. This wasn't settling an estate. This was a hostile takeover. She was trying to strip me of everything: my home, my husband's legacy, my autonomy, using my son's death as the key. She saw a frail, grieving old woman, a relic to be managed and then discarded. She thought I would simply crumble. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the air tasting of dust and deceit. I looked from the paper to her face, at her perfectly composed features, her expectant smile. I thought of Mark, the little boy with pockets full of sand dollars. I thought of Robert, and the promise his son had made. A different kind of strength, a kind I hadn't felt in years, began to solidify in my chest. It was hard and sharp, like a shard of sea-worn glass. I placed the pen down on the table beside the papers. "I'd like my lawyer to look at these first," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was surprisingly firm, quiet but absolute. It cut through the cloying atmosphere she had created. For one brief, unguarded second, the mask slipped from Amelia's face. Her smile vanished. And her eyes, which a moment before had been soft with feigned concern, hardened into chips of blue ice. It was a flicker of pure, unadulterated rage, so intense it was almost breathtaking. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, concealed once more behind the placid facade. She let out a little, tinkling laugh. "Oh, Olivia, don't be silly," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness again. "You don't need to spend money on lawyers. I'm family. I'm here to take care of you." But I had seen it. I had seen the predator behind the mask. And she had seen for the first time that I was not the prey she had assumed me to be. She gathered the papers, her movements a little too quick, a little too sharp. "Fine," she said, her tone clipped. "We'll talk about it tomorrow." She stood up and walked out of the room without another word. The silence she left behind was different. It wasn't the silence of grief anymore. It was the silence of a battlefield before the first shot is fired. The war had begun. I needed to know why. Why the cannery? It sat at the heart of this rot. I was sure of it now. It was more than a building, more than the source of our family's modest fortune. It was Robert's legacy, the world he had built with his own two hands, and I had a cold, sinking feeling it was the reason my son was dead. Amelia's words from the funeral played on a loop in my mind, a serpent's hiss promising to level it all, to erase every last trace of us from the waterfront. I had to get there before she did. The following Saturday, the sky was a sheet of flat, indifferent gray. I put on my good coat, the one I saved for church, and met Amelia in the hallway. The air between us was thick with things unsaid, a silence more suffocating than any argument. "I'm off to see Martha, dear," I said, my voice practiced and light. "Her arthritis is flaring up again." I thought I'd take her some soup. Amelia didn't look up from her phone, her thumb swiping endlessly through some curated perfect life. "That's nice, Olivia. Don't be too late. The caterer for the memorial reception is calling this afternoon." The casual mention of it, another box to be checked, sent a fresh sliver of ice into my heart. I just nodded and let myself out, the heavy front door clicking shut behind me like a final judgment. I didn't walk towards Martha's. I walked to the end of the block and called a taxi. "The old cannery on the waterfront, please," I told the driver. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Nobody went there anymore, except maybe teenagers looking for a place to drink. The drive was a journey through my own past. We left the manicured lawns of our neighborhood, the quiet streets where children learned to ride bikes, and descended toward the water. The houses grew smaller, more worn by the salt and the wind. Then, the industrial skeletons of the docks came into view. Rusted cranes stood like skeletal dinosaurs against the bruised sky. And there it was. The cannery. It looked even worse than I remembered. A hollowed-out beast, its windows like vacant eyes, its wooden sides bleached and splintered. The sign, once a proud declaration, Vance Sons Seafood, was mostly gone, a few faded letters clinging on like stubborn ghosts. I paid the driver and asked him to wait. I couldn't be sure how long I would be, or if I'd be able to get a signal to call another one. He grunted in agreement, pulling out a novel. I walked toward the building, my sensible shoes crunching on gravel and broken shells. The air tasted of brine and decay, a smell that had once meant prosperity, hard work, life. Now, it was just the smell of death. I went around to the side, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. Beside the main loading bay door, I knelt down, my old knees protesting. The third brick from the bottom. Robert had always kept a spare key there. His little bit of preparedness, his quiet admission that he too could be forgetful. My fingers, stiff with age, fumbled against the cold, damp brick. It was loose. It shifted. I slid it out, and there, nestled in the dark recess, was the key. Tarnished and green with verdigris, but it was there. My key. Our key. The lock groaned in protest, a long, scraping complaint after years of silence. But it turned. The heavy door swung inward with a shriek of rusted hinges, opening into a cathedral of shadows and dust. Light struggled through the grime-caked windows high above, casting long, ethereal beams through the motes of dust dancing in the still air. The smell was overwhelming inside. Fish and salt and damp wood and time itself. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just a smell. It was memory made tangible. I could almost see him. Robert, his arms thick with muscle, laughing as he mended a tear in a great net, his voice echoing in the vast space. I saw a flash of a much younger Mark, no older than 10, his hair a shock of blonde, running sure-footed along the high catwalks, waving down at me, fearless and full of light. The memory was so vivid, so painful, it almost brought me to my knees. I forced myself to move, my footsteps echoing unnervingly on the warped floorboards. I walked past the silent, hulking machinery of the processing line, past the stacks of rotting pallets. I was headed for the one place that was Robert's alone. His office. It was a small, cramped room at the back, little more than a box of glass and wood overlooking the docks, where the fishing boats used to moor. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was coated in a uniform layer of gray dust. His heavy oak desk, his chair, the filing cabinets. A calendar on the wall was still turned to August, 1998, the month he had died. Someone, Mark probably, had never had the heart to change it. My eyes scanned the room, looking for, I didn't know what. A clue, a sign, something out of place. And then I saw it. It was subtle, so subtle, a casual observer would have missed it completely. The wall behind his desk was paneled in dark, stained wood. But one section, a rectangle about 3 feet by 4, was different. The color of the stain was a fraction of a shade lighter. The grain of the wood didn't quite match. I stepped closer, my pulse quickening. I ran my hand over the surface. It felt smoother, less weathered than the wood around it. Then I looked at the nails. The original paneling was held in place with old, square-headed nails, their tops dark and pitted with rust. But the nails in this new section were modern, wire-cut, and the rust on them was faint, reddish, new. Robert was a man of precision, a shipwright by trade, before he was a cannery man. He believed in straight lines, perfect joints, and work that lasted. He would never have patched his own office wall with mismatched wood and shoddy craftsmanship. It was jarringly out of character. This wasn't a repair. It was a concealment. A cold certainty washed over me. This was it. This was the message. A message from my dead husband, left for me to find. Something was hidden in that wall. And whatever it was important enough for someone to want this entire building and the secret within it turned to dust. My hands were shaking. I pressed my ear against the wood, listening, as if the secret might whisper back to me. All I heard was the frantic beating of my own heart. I tried to pry at the edge of the panel with my fingernails, but it was useless. It was sealed tight. I was a 75-year-old woman with a bad knee and a coat I didn't want to get dirty. I couldn't tear down a wall by myself. I needed help. I needed an ally. And I knew, with a sudden, painful clarity, there was only one person I could possibly trust. That night, the house felt like a tomb again. The silence was a physical weight pressing down. Amelia was shut in her room, probably on the phone with her lawyers, her developers, her co-conspirators. I waited until I heard the soft click of her door, followed by the sound of the shower running. I walked down the hall, each step feeling momentous. I knocked softly on Leo's door. There was a muffled, "Yeah?" I pushed the door open. He was sitting in the glow of his laptop, the room a mess of clothes and discarded snack wrappers. He wasn't playing a game, though. The screen was open to his father's Facebook page, a mosaic of smiling photos and heartfelt tributes from people who, a month ago, had been fighting with him. "They're all posting," Leo said, his voice hollow, devoid of emotion. He didn't even look at me. He just stared at the screen. All his friends, the guys on the city council, his business partners. "Look at this one." He pointed. Councilman Rogers. Mark was a pillar of this community, a true visionary. A visionary? Last month he called Dad a paranoid obstructionist in the local paper. I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of his unmade bed. The springs creaked. "What were they arguing about, Leo?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He finally turned in his gaming chair to face me. His eyes were red-rimmed, but for the first time in weeks, they weren't vacant. There was a spark of anger in them. "The waterfront development," he said, the words sharp. "The whole big, shiny project your daughter-in-law is so excited about. Dad thought the lead developer was a snake." "A snake how?" "A guy named Henderson Properties. Dad was convinced his company was a front, that he was using a web of shell corporations to hide his real investors. He said their environmental impact report was a joke, and their financing was shady. He was trying to prove it. He spent months digging into it." My blood ran cold. Henderson. Amelia's plan. It was all connected. "Did he find anything?" I asked, my voice tight. Leo swiveled back to the laptop. He clicked a few times, then typed in a long, complex password. An icon on the desktop shimmered and opened, revealing a folder labeled simply Waterfront. "Dad taught me some basic cybersecurity stuff. Said you can't trust anyone these days. He was storing all his research here, encrypted." I took a deep breath. It was time. "Leo," I said, "I have to tell you something. Something I heard." I told him everything. I started with the funeral, with Amelia's hushed, triumphant whisper to the man in the expensive suit. I told him about the pressure to sign the power of attorney, the documents that would hand over control of everything Robert and I had ever built. I told him about my trip to the cannery, about the mismatched paneling on the wall in his grandfather's office. I told him my deepest, darkest fear, that Mark's death wasn't an accident. He listened, his face hardening with every word. The listless grief that had shrouded him for weeks burned away, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged fury that mirrored my own. The boy who had lost his father was gone. In his place was a young man looking for a fight. The fire I saw in his eyes was pure Vance. It was Robert's fire. It was Mark's. "So, Mom, she knew," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. A grim, final understanding. "I believe so," I said quietly. He stared at the screen for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then his fingers began to move, flying across the keyboard with a speed and confidence that was dizzying. He wasn't just grieving anymore, he was hunting. "Let's see who this Henderson really is, Grandma," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Let's see what my dad found." The next morning felt different. The air in the house was charged, electric. A secret alliance had been forged in the dark, and the knowledge of it was a shield around me. It was a good thing, too, because the attack came sooner than I expected. I was in the kitchen making toast when Amelia came down. She wasn't alone. A man was with her, tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my first car. He had silver hair, a tan that spoke of expensive holidays, and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. It didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Olivia," Amelia began, her voice a thick syrup of false concern. "This is Mr. Davies. He's an attorney." I put my butter knife down, my hand steady, though my heart had begun to hammer against my ribs. "Good morning, Mr. Davies." "We're worried about you, Olivia," Amelia continued, placing a hand on my arm. I resisted the urge to shake it off. "This has all been such a shock. Your grief. We're concerned about your memory, your ability to handle your affairs." I looked from her worried, dishonest face to the lawyer's predatory smile. I saw the trap, laid out as plain as day. This wasn't concern. This was a coup. "Mr. Davies is here to help us," Amelia said, "to explore the possibility of a conservatorship, just to take the burden off your shoulders. It would be for your own protection." For my own protection. The words hung in the air, obscene and insulting. They were trying to have me declared incompetent, to strip me of my rights, my home, my voice, to silence me before I could uncover what they had done. The fear was a knot of ice in my stomach. For a moment, it threatened to paralyze me. I felt small, old, and terribly alone. But then I thought of Mark's face, laughing in the sun. I thought of Robert, his hand steady on mine. I thought of the secret in the cannery wall, waiting. And the fear solidified into something else, something hard and defiant. I looked Mr. Davies directly in the eye. "Thank you for your concern, Amelia." "Mr. Davies." My voice came out calm, level, betraying none of the storm raging inside me. "But I am perfectly capable of handling my own affairs." I paused, letting the silence stretch. Then I played my only card. It was a desperate bluff, but it was all I had. And I already have my own legal counsel. The effect was immediate. Amelia's carefully constructed mask of concern tightened, the skin around her eyes crinkling with irritation. Mr. Davies's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Your own counsel?" Amelia repeated, her voice sharp. "Who? You haven't mentioned anyone." "I didn't feel the need to," I said coolly. "It's a private matter." "Olivia, don't be difficult," she snapped, the sweetness gone. "I'm not being difficult, Amelia," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "I'm protecting what's mine." What was Robert's? What should have been Mark's? The name hung in the air between us like a ghost. Mr. Davies, ever the professional, stepped smoothly into the breach. Of course," he said, his oily smile back in place. "No one wants to be difficult. Perhaps a cooling-off period is in order. We can revisit this in a few days, after everyone's had time to think." I knew exactly what it was, a tactical retreat. They had been expecting a confused, grieving old woman they could easily steamroll. They hadn't expected resistance, but they would be back, and they would be better prepared next time. The bluff had bought me a few days, nothing more. As they left the kitchen, I stood there, listening to their retreating footsteps, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving me weak and trembling. The clock was ticking. I had to turn my bluff into a reality. I had to find a lawyer, and I had to find one fast. Finding a lawyer in a town like Astoria, a town where everyone knows everyone, willing to take on a prominent local family, was an exercise in futility. The Vance name, which had once been a source of pride, was now a wall. The first lawyer I called, a man whose children had gone to school with Mark, was polite but firm. "Olivia, I'm so sorry for your loss, but taking this on, given my relationship with your family, it would present a significant conflict of interest." The second, a woman who specialized in estate law, listened to my story and then gave me a similar, practiced refusal. Mrs. Vance, I'm afraid my current caseload is simply too full to give your situation the attention it deserves. By the third call, I didn't even get past the paralegal. After hearing Amelia's name, I was put on hold, and then a crisp, professional voice told me the firm was not taking on new clients at this time. A wave of cold, heavy despair washed over me. They had me cornered. Amelia's influence ran deep in this town. I was isolated, cut off. Was I truly alone in this? Was this how it ended? Not with a bang, but with a series of polite, legalistic no's until they could declare me mad and take everything. That evening, defeated, I sat in Robert's old study. Not the office at the cannery, but the one here in the house. I was looking for anything, a financial record, an old letter, anything that might give me some leverage. I pulled a heavy, dusty photo album from the bottom shelf of the bookcase. I hadn't looked at it in years. I flipped through the stiff, yellowed pages, pictures of the house being built, Mark's first birthday, family vacations to the coast, and then a photograph I'd almost forgotten. It was of Robert's first fishing crew, taken sometime in the mid-70s. A group of young, tough-looking men in work clothes, squinting into the sun on the deck of a boat, the Astoria Bridge behind them. Robert was in the middle, proud and strong. My eyes scanned the faces, a row of ghosts from a life ago. And then they stopped. In the back row, half hidden behind a bigger man, was a skinny kid with a shy smile and a shock of dark hair. Frank Miller. The name sparked a memory, faint at first, then clearer. Frank, a bright, hard-working kid from a poor family down the river, Robert had seen something in him, had taken him under his wing. He'd worked on the boats for a few summers to save money for college. Robert had always said that boy was going to do great things. On a whim, a desperate, last-ditch impulse, I pulled out my laptop, the one Leo had set up for me, and opened Facebook. I typed Frank Miller, Portland attorney, into the search bar. My heart skipped a beat. A profile appeared. The face was older, lined with wrinkles, the hair now gray and thinning, but the eyes were the same. It was him. The profile read, Frank Miller, attorney at law, semi-retired. Specializing in elder law and estate planning. It was a shot in the dark, a 1 in a million chance, but it was the only chance I had. The profile listed a phone number. My hand trembled as I dialed. It rang 3 times, then went to voicemail. I hung up, my shoulders slumping. Of course, it was after 7 o'clock. Then, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was the same number calling me back. I answered, my throat suddenly dry. Hello? Yes, this is Frank Miller. I missed a call from this number? The voice was older, deeper, but still recognizable. Frank? It's Olivia. Olivia Vance. There was a long, profound silence on the other end of the line. For a moment I thought he had hung up. I could hear his soft, steady breathing. Olivia, he said finally, and his voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. My God, Olivia Vance. He paused again. Your husband, Robert. He did more for me than any man I've ever known. He paid for my first year of law school. He found out I was sleeping in my car to save money, and he co-signed a loan for me. He made me promise I'd never tell anyone. Tears welled in my eyes. Robert, my quiet, steadfast Robert, always doing good in the shadows. He told me, just do a good job, Frank. And if you ever see someone who needs a hand, you give them one. I never forgot that, Frank said, his voice cracking slightly. What do you need, Olivia? Anything. Hope, fragile and fierce and incandescent, bloomed in my chest, chasing away the despair. I took a shaky breath, and the entire story poured out of me. Amelia, the conservatorship, Henderson, the cannery, my suspicions about Mark, everything. I didn't leave a single detail out. He listened patiently, a quiet hum of affirmation now and then, his only interruption. When I was finished, there was another silence, but this one was different. It was the silence of a man thinking, a man planning. The vultures are circling, Olivia, he said, his voice no longer emotional, but hard as steel. "Don't you worry about a thing. Don't sign anything. Don't talk to that lawyer Davies again. You tell him to call me." He gave me his direct mobile number. "I'm coming to Astoria tomorrow," he said. "We'll fight them. We'll fight these bastards until hell freezes over." While Frank began assembling the legal barricades, Leo and I waged a different kind of war, a silent one, fought in the blue glow of a computer screen. My days were spent on the phone with Frank, going over timelines and affidavits. My nights spent in the small study with Leo, a space that now smelled permanently of coffee and teenage determination. He became a digital phantom, a ghost in the machine, slipping through the firewalls of shell corporations and labyrinthine tax filings. I'd sit in the armchair in the corner, a book open on my lap, but my eyes fixed on him, on the intense focus that furrowed his brow, so reminiscent of Mark when he was deep in a project. I'd bring him plates of sandwiches he'd forget to eat, mugs of tea that would go cold beside the humming laptop. Some nights, the frustration was a palpable thing in the room. He'd lean back, rubbing his eyes, muttering about encrypted files and rerouted servers. "It's like they built this thing to disappear," he'd say, his voice rough with fatigue. "Every time I think I have a thread, it just turns into smoke." During those moments, a cold dread would seep into me. What if we were chasing nothing? What if Amelia was just greedy and my suspicions were just the elaborate fantasies of a grieving mother? But then I'd see the glint of steel in Leo's eyes, the same stubborn refusal to quit that had defined his grandfather and his father, and my own resolve would harden again. We were not chasing smoke. We were hunting a monster that had learned to hide in the shadows of the modern world. The breakthrough came long after midnight on a Tuesday. The house was utterly still, the only sound the soft click-clack of the keyboard. I must have drifted off because I was startled awake by his voice, a sharp, excited whisper that cut through the silence. "Grandma." "Got it." I was by his side in an instant, my heart hammering against my ribs. My eyes struggled to make sense of the flowcharts and financial statements on the screen, a web of arrows and acronyms. He didn't speak, just pointed a steady finger at a name at the bottom of a complex ownership structure. "Pinnacle Holdings, LLC. That's the primary investor behind Henderson Development," he said, his voice low and tight with discovery. "It's buried under 3 other corporations registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands." It took me days to peel it all back. He clicked the mouse a few times, and another window opened, a list of board members for Pinnacle Holdings. And there it was, the name that made the air freeze in my lungs. Eleanor Dubois, Richard Dubois. Amelia's parents. I gripped the back of his chair, my knuckles white. It wasn't just a business deal, it was a family affair. Amelia's family was funding the very project that would destroy our legacy, the project she was pushing for with such venomous speed. The money trail didn't just lead to a stranger, it led directly back to her. But Leo wasn't done. His face was pale in the monitor's light, his expression grim. "There's more," he said quietly. He typed something into a search bar, not a public one, but some kind of archive of old business articles he'd accessed. When I saw the name Henderson, I remembered something Dad said once. A joke, I thought. About a shark that almost ate Grandpa's business. He scrolled through a grainy scan of an old newspaper from the 1980s. The headline read, "Local fishing magnate faces bankruptcy amidst predatory pricing war." And the article named Robert's chief competitor, the man who had systematically undercut him, flooded the market, and nearly drove him to ruin. A man named Marcus Henderson, the developer's father. I sank into the chair beside him, the book sliding unnoticed to the floor. The name, Henderson, it wasn't just a name. It was a ghost. I remembered it now, not clearly, but in flashes. Robert coming home late, his face ashen. The hushed, angry phone calls. The word shark being spat out with a venom I'd rarely heard from him. That business war. It wasn't just business. It was personal. It was brutal. And the stress of it, the unending pressure, had been the catalyst for his first heart attack. The one that had weakened him, that had stolen years from our life together. Henderson's father had tried to kill my husband's dream, and in doing so, had started the slow, cruel process of killing him, too. And now his son was back to finish the job, It all clicked into place, a series of horrifying, perfectly interlocking pieces. This wasn't about progress or waterfront revitalization. This wasn't even just about money. This was a vendetta, a blood feud, passed from father to son, aimed at the utter annihilation of the Vance family name. Mark hadn't just stumbled upon a shady real estate deal. He had unknowingly uncovered the original sin, the festering wound that had shadowed our family for decades. He had found the rot at the root of our family tree. And Amelia. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea washing over me. Every memory of her was now tainted, poisoned by this new reality, her charming smile at our first meeting, her tender words at the wedding. Her feigned grief at Mark's funeral. It was all a lie, a long, patient, meticulously crafted performance. She hadn't married into our family. She had infiltrated it. She was a saboteur, a Trojan horse sent to destroy us from the inside, to avenge a slight that happened before she was even born. She was the final move in a generational chess game, and she had just taken our king. The conservatorship hearing felt like being flayed alive in public. The courtroom was a sterile, intimidating chamber of polished wood and cold light, designed to make a person feel small and insignificant. I sat beside Frank, my hands clenched in my lap, trying to project an aura of calm I was nowhere near feeling. Amelia sat across the aisle with her lawyer, a man named Davies, with a serpent smile and eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. She was dressed in a simple dark dress, a picture of bereaved, concerned sobriety. Davies began his assault by painting me as a pitiable creature, a woman unmoored by grief, lost in a fog of senile paranoia. He spoke in a tone of deep, regretful sympathy that made my skin crawl. "We are here today," he began, addressing the judge, "not out of malice, but out of profound concern for Olivia Vance's well-being, a woman we all respect, who has suffered an unimaginable loss, and whose mind, tragically, appears to be suffering along with her heart." He called his witnesses. First, a woman from my book club who testified with a sad shake of her head that I had, on several occasions, become confused about the plot of our monthly selection. "She thought the hero had died in Chapter 3, the woman said, looking at me with what she probably thought was compassion. But he was the narrator. It was quite disconcerting. Next came a neighbor who spoke of seeing me wandering the yard late at night, muttering to myself. He failed to mention I was usually just talking to the stray cat I'd been feeding. Davies made it sound like I was communing with spirits. He twisted every quirk, every minor forgetfulness that comes with age, into a symptom of profound mental decay. He asked me questions on the stand designed to trip me up about dates and times from weeks ago, and when I hesitated, he would give the judge a small, knowing look. "See? She can't remember." The most vicious part was when he brought up the cannery. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice dripping with false patience, "can you tell the court about your belief that your daughter-in-law is part of a conspiracy related to this old, dilapidated building?" I looked at Amelia. Her eyes were cast down, her shoulders shaking slightly. The perfect victim. "It's not a belief," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "It's the truth." "A truth for which you have no evidence?" he countered smoothly. "Just a feeling? A fantasy you've constructed to cope with the pain?" Then, Amelia took the stand. It was a masterful, sickening performance. Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke of her deep, abiding love for Mark. Her voice broke as she described her worry for me, her sole remaining family. "I love Olivia," she sobbed, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "She's like my own mother, but she's not herself anymore. After the accident, she started saying these terrible things, that I hurt Mark, that I'm trying to steal from her. She gets so agitated. She locks herself away. I'm just so afraid she's going to hurt herself. All I want is to protect her, to manage her affairs so she can live out her years in peace, without these delusions." I watched the judge's face. His expression, initially one of stern neutrality, softened with sympathy. He looked at Amelia, this beautiful, weeping young widow, and then at me, the hard-faced, accusing old woman. I could feel the narrative cementing in his mind. I could feel the case and my freedom slipping away. The clinical cruelty of it was breathtaking. They were using my love for my son as the very weapon to paint me as insane. My grief wasn't just a private agony. It was now evidence for the prosecution. During the first recess, the facade I had so carefully constructed shattered. The moment we were in the witness waiting room, a small, windowless box, my body began to tremble. I sank onto a hard plastic chair, the courtroom's fluorescent hum still buzzing in my ears. "I can't do this, Frank," I whispered, my voice a ragged, unfamiliar thing. My hands were shaking so badly I had to hide them in the folds of my skirt. "He's twisting everything. They're all looking at me like I'm crazy." Maybe I am. Frank didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He pulled a chair up to face me, his knees almost touching mine, and put a firm, grounding hand on my shoulder. His grip was strong, steady. "Listen to me, Olivia," he said, his voice low and intense. "You are not crazy. You are angry, and you have every right to be. Don't let that snake in a suit tell you what your grief is supposed to look like." He leaned in closer, his gaze unwavering. "Robert didn't raise a fool, and he didn't marry one. He respected you more than anyone. He believed in your strength. I saw it. Mark saw it. He believed in you, in your goodness, in your backbone." He squeezed my shoulder. "Yes, you can do this. You are the only one who can. Forget the judge, forget the lawyer, forget her crocodile tears. You get back on that stand, you look them in the eye, and you tell your truth. Not their version of it, yours, for Robert. For Mark." He said my son's name, and it was like a switch was flipped. The image of Mark's face flashed in my mind, not his face in the coffin, but his real face, smiling, alive, full of trust and love. The trembling in my hands stopped. The fear didn't vanish, but it receded, replaced by something cold and hard and clear. It was the steel I needed for my spine. I was not a confused old woman. I was a mother fighting for her murdered son. My testimony after the recess must have given the judge pause. Frank's words had forged my fear into a weapon, and I spoke with a clarity that seemed to unnerve Davies. We managed to stall the conservatorship. The judge, no longer fully convinced by Amelia's performance, deferred his decision pending an independent psychiatric evaluation. It wasn't a victory, but it was a stay of execution. It bought us time, but it also enraged Amelia. The mask of the grieving widow slipped the moment we were out of the courtroom. I saw her across the lobby, her face a mask of cold fury, as she spoke in clipped, angry tones to her lawyer. She had been denied her quick, clean victory. She had been challenged. Her response was swift and brutal. 2 days later, it appeared. A large laminated sign zip-tied to the rusting chain-link fence of the cannery. A demolition permit. It was official, stamped by the city, clinical and final. I stood there on the cracked pavement, reading the words that felt like a death sentence. Demolition scheduled to commence in 1 week. 1 week, 7 days until the cannery, and the secrets I was certain it held, would be reduced to a pile of rubble and dust. The proof I needed, the one thing that could vindicate me and bring justice for Mark, was hidden inside that wall in Robert's office, and in 1 week, it would be gone forever. This was a new kind of obstacle, brutally practical and time-sensitive. My panic was a physical thing, a tightness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. To make matters worse, Amelia had hired security, a private firm. A clean white SUV was now parked permanently by the gate, and 2 uniformed guards patrolled the perimeter around the clock. The cannery wasn't just abandoned anymore. It was a fortress. "We can't get in," I told Leo later that day, my voice strained, pacing the living room floor. The permit felt like a ticking bomb. They're watching it constantly. A guard walks the fence line every 20 minutes. There's no way. Leo stood by the window, looking out toward the waterfront, the demolition notice I'd brought home lying on the table between us. He was quiet for a long time, his eyes narrowed in thought. He looked at the notice, then at his laptop, which was open on the dining table. A slow, mischievous smile, an expression so quintessentially his, spread across his face. It was the smile of an idea being born, an audacious, impossible idea. "Maybe we don't have to get in," he said, turning to face me, his eyes gleaming. "Not sneak in anyway. Maybe we just have to get everyone else to show up." He sat down at the table and pulled the laptop closer. He opened Facebook and navigated to a page I'd never seen before. Astoria Community Watch Forum. It was a bustling page, full of posts about lost dogs, complaints about parking, and announcements for local bake sales. Leo's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "People in this town love their history," he said, more to himself than to me. "And they hate big-shot developers from out of town telling them what to do." He began to type. His plan was breathtaking in its simplicity and its nerve. He wasn't going to hack a security system or pick a lock. He was going to use the most powerful and unpredictable force he could harness: public opinion. He was going to create a protest out of thin air. "Urgent. Save the historic Vance Cannery." "Kapse. Nie." He typed in all caps. "Did you know that out-of-state developers are planning to demolish one of Astoria's last true waterfront landmarks in 1 week to build luxury condos? The Vance Cannery isn't just an old building, it's a piece of our history. It was one of the first female-owned businesses on the Columbia River back in the day." A slight embellishment, but a powerful one. "It provided jobs for generations of Astorians. My grandfather worked there. This is our heritage. They're about to turn into rubble for a quick buck. We can't let them erase our past. Protest and rally this Saturday at 10 a.m. Let's show them what Astoria's history means to us." Save the Cannery. #Astoria Pride. He found an old black and white photo of the cannery in its heyday online and attached it to the post. Then, with a few clicks, he created an official-looking event page: "Peaceful Protest to Preserve the Historic Vance Cannery." Within minutes, he had shared it to a dozen other local groups. He used 2 or 3 dummy accounts he'd created to add the first comments. "This is an outrage. My grandmother told me stories about this place. I'll be there." I watched, mesmerized, as the plan took digital flight. It was a lie, a complete fabrication, a piece of brilliant, desperate misdirection. He was creating a chaotic public spectacle with one purpose: to draw the attention of the guards, the police, the entire town to the front gate, so that one old woman could slip in the back with a crowbar. The ticking of the clock suddenly sounded less like a bomb and more like a starting gun. The morning they came to kill my husband's legacy, the sky was a sharp, unforgiving blue. It was the kind of cold, bright day that makes everything look clearer, more defined. The edges of the world felt like cut glass. From my bedroom window, I watched them arrive. The bulldozers were monstrous, yellow beasts, their diesel engines rumbling with a low, gut-deep threat that vibrated through the floorboards of the old house. They moved into position around the cannery, squatting on the frost-covered ground like vultures waiting for the final breath. My breath hitched, a small, tight knot in my chest. This was it, the end of the line. But then, something else began. A single car pulled up, then another. A small group of people got out, clutching handwritten signs. Then more came. It was like watching a slow, strange tide roll in. Leo's plan, his digital ghost of a movement, was taking on flesh and blood. His Astoria Historical Preservation Society, a fiction spun from a few cleverly worded posts and a hastily created Facebook event page, had worked. It had worked better than either of us had dared to hope. He'd spent 2 sleepless nights crafting a narrative of the cannery's unrecognized architectural and social significance, a cornerstone of Astoria's working-class heritage. He'd started a Change.org petition that, to my astonishment, had garnered over 1,000 local signatures. He'd even dug up old black-and-white photos of the original cannery workers and posted them with poignant, invented captions. The crowd that gathered was a brilliant, chaotic tapestry of our town. There were aging hippies in tie-dyed shirts, their long gray hair blowing in the wind, holding signs that said things like "Honor our history" and "Corporate greed kills communities." There were high school students, likely skipping class, who saw it as a righteous cause or just a good excuse to be part of something. One of them was already filming a TikTok, pointing dramatically at the bulldozers with a filter that made it look like they were crying glittery tears. A stern-faced woman who looked like a university professor was trying to get people to sign a physical copy of the petition on a clipboard. It was a beautiful, ridiculous, perfect mess. Amelia's hired security, two burly men in identical black jackets, looked utterly bewildered. They were prepared for a single, determined old woman, not a makeshift protest rally. They stood near the main gate, speaking into their radios, their heads swiveling back and forth as the crowd began to chant. It was a clumsy, out-of-sync chant, but it was loud. That was our signal. "Ready, Grandma?" Leo whispered. He stood beside me in the shadow of the overgrown hedge that bordered the cannery property. He was buzzing with nervous energy, his phone already in his hand. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. My hand was wrapped around the cold, heavy steel of a crowbar I'd taken from the garden shed. It felt alien in my grasp, a tool of creation repurposed for an act of violation. Or perhaps an act of reclamation. "Okay," he said, taking a deep breath. "I'm going live in 30 seconds. #CanneryChaos. The stream creates my alibi and it documents the protest in case Amelia tries to say we incited a riot. They're all watching the front gate, the side gate by the old loading dock. The chain is rusted through. I checked it yesterday. We go now." We moved quickly, two ghosts slipping along the periphery of the chaos. My joints ached in the cold, but adrenaline was a potent medicine. The side gate groaned in protest as Leo pulled it open just enough for me to squeeze through. The smell hit me instantly, the familiar, long-dormant scent of rust, salt, and damp concrete. The smell of my life. "I'll stay out here," Leo said, his eyes wide but determined. He was no longer just my grandson. He was my co-conspirator, my partner in this desperate final gambit. "Keep the stream going. Make sure everyone sees me here, with the crowd. It gives you cover. And go straight to Grandpa's office. You know where it is." I reached out and put my hand on his cheek. His skin was cold. "Be careful, Leo." "You too, Grandma," he said, his voice cracking just a little. "Go find the truth." He melted back toward the growing noise of the protest, his phone held up to capture the scene. I was alone. The roar of the machines and the chanting of the crowd seemed to recede, muffled by the thick cannery walls. Inside, it was a cavern of silence and shadow. Light struggled through grime-caked windows, illuminating dancing dust motes in long, slanted columns. My footsteps echoed on the cracked concrete floor, each one a hammer blow against the stillness. I walked past the ghostly outlines of where the conveyor belts and sorting tables once stood. I could almost hear the echoes of the past, the clang of machinery, the shouts of the workers, the shrill whistle that signaled the end of a shift. I saw my husband, Robert, a younger man with ink on his fingers and a smile on his face, walking this same path. I saw my son, Mark, as a boy, running through these aisles, his laughter bouncing off the corrugated metal walls. These memories were not gentle. They were sharp, painful shards of what had been stolen from me. The crowbar in my hand felt heavier with every step. It was no longer just a piece of steel. It was the weight of my suspicion, the heft of my grief, the focused point of all my impotent rage. This wasn't just about a box in a wall. It was about tearing down the facade that Amelia had so carefully constructed, the one that had hidden a rot so deep it had consumed my family from the inside out. Finally, I reached the administrative wing. The door to Robert's old office was closed. The frosted glass panel, once stenciled with his name, was now just a milky, blank eye. I pushed it open. The hinges shrieked. The room was as I remembered it, only suffocated by a thick layer of dust. The heavy oak desk, the leather-bound chairs, the framed photograph of the first fishing boat our family ever owned, all of it coated in the gray velvet of neglect. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat against the distant, steady roar of the bulldozers. They were a clock, ticking down the seconds I had left. I ran my hand along the paneled wall behind the desk, the wall Robert had been so proud of, made from timber salvaged from an old schooner. My fingers searched, seeking the subtle difference I'd noticed weeks ago, the slight variance in the grain, the almost imperceptible seam. I found it. A section about 4 feet square that was just a fraction smoother, the varnish a shade less amber. It was there. It had to be. I wedged the tip of the crowbar into the thin seam where the newer panel met the old wood. My hands were shaking, but my purpose was absolute. I took a deep, steadying breath, tasting the dust in the air, and put my weight into it. Just as the metal bit into the wood with a sickening crunch, the office door flew open, slamming against the wall with a force that shook the dust from the ceiling. It was Amelia. Her face was a storm. The polite, grieving mask she wore for the world was gone, ripped away to reveal the raw, contorted fury beneath. Her expensive coat was open, her carefully styled hair was coming undone, and her eyes burned with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful in its intensity. "What in God's name do you think you're doing, you senile old witch?" she snarled. Her voice was no longer the soft, melodic tone she used to placate me. It was low and jagged, a weapon in its own right. "The security guards called me. A protest? You arranged a protest? To stop this? To do this?" She gestured wildly at the crowbar in my hands, at the fresh scar in the wall. I didn't answer. I just gritted my teeth and pushed harder on the crowbar. The wood groaned, a long, deep complaint. "It's over, Amelia," I said, my voice quiet but carrying over the sound of splintering timber. The effort sent a sharp pain through my shoulder, but I welcomed it. It was real. It was honest. "Over?" She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "It's just beginning. Once they declare you incompetent, and they will after this little stunt, I will own everything. This pile of rust, the house, every last penny. You'll be in a nice, quiet home with soft walls, remembering none of it." "You're wrong," I said, panting with the effort. "Mark knew. That's why you had to get rid of him, isn't it? He was looking into Henderson. He was getting close." Her face spasmed, a flicker of something that might have been fear. "You don't know what you're talking about. Mark was a fool, just like his father. Sentimental. Weak." "He knew who Henderson's father was," I said, ignoring her insults, focusing on the pressure, on the task. "He knew what your family did to Robert all those years ago. The extortion, the threats, driving him to the edge. He found the pattern. He was putting it all together." She lunged at me then, her manicured fingers curled into claws. "You will not ruin this for me." But grief had made me wary, and desperation had made me quick. I twisted my body, using the crowbar as a brace, and she stumbled past me, catching herself on the edge of the dusty desk. In that split second, I put every ounce of my remaining strength, every bit of my rage and my sorrow, into one final heave. With a loud crack that echoed like a gunshot in the small room, the wood paneling gave way. It splintered and tore, swinging inward on a single stubborn nail. And there, nestled in the dark space between the wall studs, insulated with old horsehair packing, was a small, dark box. It was lined with lead. Robert had always been paranoid about fire, about destruction. He wanted some things to survive anything. Amelia's eyes, wide with disbelief, fixed on the box. The fury in them curdled into something else, something primal and terrifying, murderous rage. "That belongs to me," she shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical register. I reached into the cavity and pulled the box out. It was heavy, solid, the weight of truth. I clutched it to my chest as she launched herself at me again, no longer a grieving daughter-in-law, but a cornered animal. She clawed at my arms, trying to rip the box from my grasp. "Give it to me! Give it to me now!" We struggled, a grotesque dance in the dusty, dying light of the office. Her strength was fueled by greed, mine by a righteous, cleansing anger. And then, a new light joined the fray. Red and blue, flashing rhythmically, washing over us, painting the dust motes in the air in frantic, strobing colors. A siren, faint at first, grew steadily louder, cutting through the noise of the protest and the bulldozers outside. It was a wail of judgment, getting closer and closer. Leo and Frank. They had done it. Amelia froze, her head snapping toward the window. The flashing lights reflected in her wide, panicked eyes. The fight went out of her, replaced by the dawning horror of being caught. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I just stood there, my breath coming in ragged gasps, clutching the lead-lined box to my chest. The weight of my family's history, of its secrets and its salvation, was finally in my hands. The office door crashed open again. This time it wasn't Amelia. It was two uniformed police officers, their hands on their holsters, their faces grim and businesslike. "Police, everybody stay where you are," one of them shouted. Amelia let out a strangled sob and staggered back, her face a pale, ghostly mask in the flashing lights. I calmly placed the box on Robert's desk and opened the simple latch. Inside, resting on top of a stack of brittle, leather-bound ledgers, was a small plastic audio cassette. "Officer," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I think you'll want to listen to this. It's a recording of my daughter-in-law, Amelia, and a property developer named Henderson. They're discussing how a boating accident for my son Mark would solve all of their problems." The aftermath was a blur of noise and flashing lights, a whirlwind that swept away the quiet, suffocating grief of the past year and replaced it with the harsh, public glare of scandal. The media descended on Astoria like gulls on a fishing boat. They called it the Cannery Conspiracy in bold, lurid headlines. The story was too good to resist. A grieving grandmother, a treacherous daughter-in-law, a generational feud, and a secret hidden in the walls of a dying factory. I became a local celebrity overnight, a folk hero in some circles, a crazy old woman in others. I didn't care what they called me. I had the truth. Amelia and Henderson were arrested that same day. The tape was undeniable. Robert's old ledgers, meticulously kept, detailed the predatory business practices of Henderson's father, providing the motive that the district attorney had been missing. The charges were conspiracy and first-degree murder. The conservatorship hearing was dismissed with a sheepish apology from the judge. The legal machine that Amelia had set in motion to crush me had turned around and devoured her instead. The truth, once buried under layers of wood paneling and polite lies, was finally free, and it was ravenous. I didn't keep the cannery. The ghosts there were too loud, their whispers too insistent. After the police tape came down, I walked through it one last time, not with a crowbar, but with a sense of profound finality. I sold it, not to a developer who would tear it down, but to a legitimate historical trust, the kind Leo had invented for his protest. They promised to restore it, to turn it into a museum of the local fishing industry. They wanted to name a wing after Robert, but I refused. His legacy wasn't in a building, it was in the truth we had unearthed. The big lonely house on the hill had to go too. Every room held a memory, and too many of them were now tainted. The silence in its halls was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. I sold it to a young family from Portland who fell in love with the view and had no idea of the sorrow that had soaked into its foundations. I hope they fill it with laughter. It deserves that. The money from the sales, combined with the insurance payout for Mark's death that I now controlled, was a considerable sum. But it felt like blood money. I couldn't spend it. So with Frank Miller's help, I put it all into a foundation in Mark's name. It provides scholarships for students pursuing marine biology and grants for environmental protection of the coastline. His name would no longer be associated with tragedy, but with hope, with the future of the very waters that had taken him. Today, I live in a small, modern condominium on the waterfront. It's clean and bright, with large windows that let in the light. From my balcony, I can see the restored cannery, its new paint gleaming in the sun. Further out, I can watch the cargo ships and fishing boats as they navigate the treacherous currents of the Columbia River Bar, the same waters where my son drew his last breath. Some days the grief is still a physical weight, an ache deep in my bones that the sea air can't wash away. But it's a clean grief now. It's the pure, simple pain of a mother who misses her son, unburdened by the poison of suspicion, unclouded by secrets and lies. It's a grief I can live with. My grandson Leo is in his second year at Portland State, studying digital forensics. He found his calling in the chaos of our fight, in the patterns he uncovered in the dark corners of the internet. He's brilliant at it. We talk every day, sometimes on the phone, sometimes on a video call where I can see his face, his eyes so much like his father's. He tells me about his classes, about a new piece of code he's learning, and I tell him about the book I'm reading or the tide coming in. The family I had is gone, shattered by a betrayal that ran deeper than the ocean itself. But in the wreckage, Leo and I found each other. We built something new, something stronger, forged in the fire of that terrible truth. I am not the woman I was a year ago. That woman was quiet, accommodating, slowly fading into the wallpaper of her own life. That woman is gone. I am a survivor. I am a fighter. I am free. I stand on my balcony, breathing in the salt-scoured air. It smells of the sea, of distance, of possibility. And for the first time in a very long time, I feel the quiet, profound peace of justice. We all have walls we build around our lives, some made of wood and plaster, others of fear and silence. And behind every wall, a truth is waiting. What secret, what story is waiting to be uncovered in your life? Let me know in the comments below.